My name is Paul. I'm one of the teaching pastors here at Epic. So it is finally December, or for some of us, it's already December, right? Lights are going up all over the place. We're starting to use words like holly and jolly way more than we usually do, right? Nobody's using holly and jolly in July, right? There's a strange substance that starts to show up on the shelves and at social gatherings. It's called eggnog. It's called eggnog. How many of you guys, anyone here like eggnog? Raise your hand. Okay, awesome. You guys are weird. You're so weird. I mean, okay, if you like eggnog, hey, more power to you. That's great. I can't, okay? I can't do it. I can't do eggnog. I think the name alone prevents me from doing eggnog. I can't drink something called nog. You know what I mean? Like, I can't put that into my body. I can't do it. I don't need that in my life. I really don't need that. Which brings me to the question that we're asking during this series and this season: who needs Christmas? Who needs Christmas? Do I need it? Do you need it? Is it only religious people who need it? Do we really need Christmas? Or is this just a nice story that we tell every year? Is it just a reason for us to buy presents and to decorate our homes and to hang out with our family? Is it just an excuse for eggnog to exist? But we're going to be thinking about this question for the next few weeks, and I'm going to reveal my hand a little early. I think everybody needs Christmas. I think the world does. And it's not just for the religious folks. It's even for the folks who don't consider themselves to be religious at all. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's talk about the story of Christmas first. So most of us know or have heard of at least the basics of the Christmas story. 2,000 years ago, there was a girl named Mary who is going to be married to a guy named Joseph. And they find out that they're unexpectedly going to have a baby. Now, while this would have been a scandal for everyone around them, the actual reason they're having this baby is much crazier than that. An angel appears to Mary and says that she's going to have a son by the power of the Holy Spirit, and she should name that son Jesus. And that name means to deliver, to rescue, to save. So are you familiar with this story so far? Okay, good, because the story of Christmas doesn't actually start there. It actually starts about 2,000 years before that. And it actually starts with another couple, and a much older couple who always wanted to have a baby, but they were never able to, and now they're too old for that to happen. Their names are Abraham and Sarah. And we find their story in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, in chapter 12. So let's take a look. It says, "The Lord said to Abram," who becomes Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." So Abraham hears God saying to him, "Go, leave where you are, leave your people, leave your family." And this is a bigger deal than it might seem. In Abraham's world, you don't just up and leave. You don't just up and leave. This wasn't 2018. Moving and leaving where you're from, it's way easier now. We're way more mobile now than they were back then. So for example, there are a ton of people here at our church who aren't from Philly, including myself. And even those of you who are from Philly, you probably at some point have moved away for a while and then you've come back. So a ton of people here, you know what it's like to go somewhere else. That is not Abraham's life. That is not Abraham's world. Your tribe, your current people, that's everything. So you don't just up and leave. But God tells Abraham, hey, up and leave. Leave everything you know and everything you know. And then as we'll see in the next verse, he makes this promise to Abraham. He says, you'll be able to work remotely. I'll pay for the professional movers to move your stuff, and you can still FaceTime all of your loved ones along the way. Isn't that convenient? Real nice. So Abraham's like, cool, sounds like an adventure. I'm in, sign me up. Not the case. But hey, if you have ever had professional movers move your stuff for you, all right, this is a really good example of how much easier it is for us to move. So if you've ever had professional movers move your stuff for you, hey, that's great. I'm really happy for you, but also I kind of hate you a little bit. I need you to know that. So back in my day, all right, we moved our own couches and we threw out our own backs. That's how it's done, okay? So this did not happen, obviously, but God does make a promise to Abraham, and it's a big one. Here it is, the real one. He says, I will make you into a great nation, which first of all, Abraham and Sarah haven't even had kids. They're not even able to have kids, so there's a little bit of tension here already. And I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God makes this crazy promise to Abraham and Sarah, even though they can't have kids, even though he's asking them to leave everything and everyone they know, God promises that they'll become a great nation. And not only will they become a great nation, God says that he'll bless them and that everyone will be blessed through them. And now we're talking about this because if you really want to understand Christmas, you don't just need to know about Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus. We need to talk about two really important words: blessing and religion. Blessing and religion. So first, blessing. God promises to bless Abraham and all people. But bless is a really weird word, isn't it? Bless is a weird word. Like, we don't use that word very often either. It's like holly, it's like jolly, it's like eggnog. It's weird, okay? Most people only use the word bless when it's a response to when you sneeze. Do you know what I mean? Or, people will use it sarcastically. Like, they'll say, after you do something, they'll say, oh, bless your heart. Or has anyone ever said that to you? Like, oh, bless your heart. When someone says that to me, I want to say, bless your heart. Tell me to bless my heart. Or thanks to DJ Khaled, we now have bless up. That's a thing, right? You answer the phone, bless up, right? I'm going to make that my voicemail now. Bless up, go ahead. But what does this word even mean, right? What does the word bless even mean? I bet nobody would even be able to say what that means. Everyone's saying bless up. We don't even know what that means. What does it mean to be blessed? So the root of that word bless in Hebrew actually refers all the way back to God's original blessing on Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And what that is a representation of life as it should be, life that thrives and life that is full. And it actually implies a relationship with God that leads to wholeness. So here's hopefully a helpful definition of blessed. To be blessed is to experience wholeness. Okay, to be blessed means to experience wholeness spiritually, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. And even simpler terms, to be blessed means to experience true happiness. So this is the type of happiness that restores you and makes you whole and actually lasts. And this is what God promises to Abraham: blessing or wholeness. Okay? And I want to pause from the story with Abraham for a minute because I think this is a really great opportunity for us to all find some common ground. So you may never have used the vocabulary of being blessed, or you may be so far removed from using that kind of language, but we all want wholeness, don't we? Like, we all want wholeness. Like, isn't that what we want? Some of us might call this the pursuit of happiness, right? But anything that we want, anything that we desire, isn't true happiness or isn't true wholeness what's underneath the things that we want? So let me put it this way. The desire for wholeness is the desire behind our desires. It makes sense? You're following me? The desire for wholeness is the desire behind our desires. Anytime we talk about the things that we want or the things that we desire, what's behind those things we want and the things that we desire is the desire for wholeness. So you want to have success? That is your desire for wholeness. You want to have a relationship where you can love and be loved. Underneath that is your desire for wholeness. And we're all trying to be whole. And I think sometimes we make really strange attempts at being whole, but we're all trying to be whole. I think this is true even if you want silly, kind of surface level, maybe more shallow things. I think this is still true. So here's an example. Here's something that I've noticed about myself. I've noticed a pattern with some of the purchases that I've made in my lifetime. So I have made some of my dumbest purchases, or at least the most unnecessary purchases, or the kind of purchases that you look back on and maybe you immediately regret them, or maybe a year or two later you're like, why did I ever buy this? Why did I ever think this was a good idea? I don't even use this anymore. I don't need this. Why did I do this? I have made those kinds of purchases when I have been unhappy. I don't know about you, okay, but this is me. I have noticed this about myself. I have made those kinds of purchases when I have been unhappy. It was always when I was feeling stressed out, or right after a breakup, or everything else was going wrong, right? I felt like everything else was going wrong. So what was I trying to do? I was trying to do something that I could control, right? And I can control swiping my credit card, and I can punch in the numbers on my credit card on Amazon, and I can get this tangible thing to try to make me happy, even though it was temporary. Am I the only one who's ever done that? This is other people too, right? So, okay, good. So that's called a coping mechanism. That is called a coping mechanism. And here's something very, very important. Do not ever confuse coping with living. Do not ever confuse coping with living. And this is something that we do a lot, by the way. Our coping mechanisms, they reveal the desire that's underneath, which is our desire for wholeness. And maybe you've never thought about it that way, but we all want that, right? I mean, does anybody here, you just want to be empty and broken? Is that anybody? Yeah, that sounds great. Sign me up. That's awesome. No, we don't want that, right? We want to be whole. So let's bring it back to Abraham then. So what Abraham promised, or what God promises to Abraham is blessing, and that's what we all want, wholeness. And so God just says, Abraham, if you'll follow me, if you'll trust me, you'll experience wholeness. And so this is maybe the point where some of us will want to break off. So you might say, what, I don't want that, because that sounds like religion. And so once you bring God into this, that's religion, and I don't do religion. So for a lot of people, if anything looks like or sounds like or feels like or smells like religion, you're out. And that's understandable. So I think all I'm trying to do here is trying to find some common ground. I still think there's common ground to be had. I think that we're all a little more religious than we think we are. So when you hear religion, you probably think of the religions you know. You may think of God. You might think of churches or mosques. You might think of the Pope or Catholic school. You might think of people handing out pamphlets on the street that have weird illustrations on them. You're like, what is this? You might think a lot of things, good and bad, all of that's in there, okay? But what is religion? Here's one of the definitions that you'll find if you Google the definition of religion. Religion is a particular system of faith and worship. And so that's probably the definition that pops into your head first, along with all of the other associated stuff, good and bad. And this is where a lot of people are like, yeah, no, I'm out. No, thank you. But there's a secondary definition that I think it's a little bit more relevant to all of us. So here it is. Religion is a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes or assigns supreme importance. So let's take a look at this definition, okay? A pursuit or interest which someone ascribes supreme importance. So is there a pursuit, any interest, any idea, any lifestyle, anything to which you would ascribe or assign a lot of importance? So if you look at it that way, I might kind of be religious a little bit. And so there's a really interesting book about this topic. It's written by David Dark, and it's called Life is Too Short to Pretend You're Not Religious. I love that. What a great title. Isn't that a great title? Like, tell me you're not at least a little intrigued, right? And so in the book, David, who is an English teacher and now a religion professor, says this about religion. In its root meaning, religion, ooh, that looks fun. Just follow my words. Oh, there we go, great. In its root meaning, religion, from the Latin religare. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how to pronounce Latin words, all right? I didn't take any Latin classes. I'm going to give him a religare. Sounds right, feels right, whatever. My best guess. To bind again, to bind back. So in its root meaning, religion is simply a tying together, a question of how we see fit to organize ourselves and our resources. So he basically says religion is how we choose to tie things together. This is my tying together motion, okay? I don't know what I'm doing. It's how we choose to tie things together. It's how we choose to organize ourselves, and how do we order ourselves with the world around us. And David makes this case that this is something that we all do, regardless of our association with a specific faith or church or whatever. So for all of us, he actually says this: religion happens. Like for everybody, religion happens. Every single one of us, religion happens, because religion is the way we choose to organize ourselves. So for example, some of you may organize yourselves around God or a specific church or faith. Some of you may not organize yourselves around God, but you do organize yourself around some idea or some philosophy or some combination of experience and knowledge. You might organize yourself, for example, around working to make a living so you can comfortably retire, working to prove yourself, working to find purpose in that work. So that might be something that you organize yourself around. You might organize yourself around a person, or maybe you have at times in your life have organized yourself around a person, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, your kids even. You might organize yourself around your most recent experiences or even your past pain. So something like, because my girlfriend or spouse left me or cheated on me, I'm now gonna live my life untethered and uncommitted. Because as a result of that, I'm gonna organize myself around this understanding because of this thing that happened to me. So some of us are organizing ourselves around something that's happened a long time ago. You might organize yourself around a philosophy or a motto or some mixture of philosophies and ideas from a bunch of sources. So this could be teachers, this could be books, this could be a meme that somebody shared on Instagram that made you go, man, I'm gonna get a tattoo of that. That's cool. Like, I'm gonna dance like nobody's watching. I'm gonna live, laugh, love. Yeah. Whatever it is, okay? So in that way, it's not just the religious people who are religious. We're all kind of religious. So we all have this in common with each other and everyone else for that matter. We all organize ourselves around something. We've all chosen some way to tie everything together, and we all do that in the quest for wholeness. We all have chosen some kind of way to organize everything in the quest for wholeness. We're all basically just trying to figure out the best way to really live. So the question for all of us is this: does the way that I organize myself and everything around me, or if you want to word it this way, does my religion lead me to wholeness? Does the way I have organized myself have the capacity to lead me to wholeness? Am I truly living life this way? And so here's what this has to do with Christmas. An angel appears to Mary and says that she's going to give birth to a son named Jesus. Again, Jesus means to deliver, to rescue, to save. This was the answer to the promise that God had made to Abraham that all people would be blessed, would be made whole through him. And by the way, Abraham and Sarah, they do end up having a son miraculously, and over the course of time, they do become a nation. So God was actually keeping his promise, and the Israelites began to wait on the next part of that promise, which was blessing and wholeness. And they weren't the only ones waiting. It was everybody, because every human being has this desire for wholeness. Every single human being, we have this longing for something to be better. Do you know? Like, I don't know, I haven't met too many people who are like, yeah, everything is just totally good. Everything, it's fine. Like, we all have this longing for things to be better. And so Jesus came to us because God wants that wholeness for everyone. That's Christmas. But still, do we really need Christmas? Do we really need Christmas? Have you ever heard of the Christmas truce of 1914? Anyone heard of this? So 1914 was the beginning of one of the most terrible wars that we have ever seen, ever, World War I. So between 1914 and 1918, more than 25 million people were killed or wounded, and in some of the most terrible ways. And you have bullets, and you have bombs, you have poison gas, and this is a period of real darkness and violence and hatred and uncertainty. But something special happened on December 24th, 1914, in the trenches of the Western Front. So the British and the German forces had been fighting each other in France, and for weeks, the weather was miserable. It was just wet and miserable. But on Christmas Eve, on December 24th, it got cold, and there was just enough snow and ice that had covered the ground to make it feel a little bit like Christmas. And in the evening, after the fighting had finally stopped, so there was no more gunfire, no more mortar blast, it was quiet. The Germans were in their trenches, and the British were across from them in their trenches. And the British soldiers heard something coming from the German side. Quiet, the cold air, it was a song that the Germans were singing. Silent Night. Can you imagine being a British soldier lying in your trench, cold, after all the horror you've probably witnessed and been through? To bombs going off all night, and suddenly you hear this song that you know. Some of the stories go that the British actually started singing along in their own language, and after the Germans were singing Silent Night, some of the British soldiers responded by singing the First Noel. And at one point, some German scouts, they were actually brave enough to pop their head out above their trenches. And they kept their heads. There weren't any bullets or guns shot. And they crossed no man's land over the scarred earth between these two groups, and they met some of the British soldiers there, and they gave them what stuff they had, and they said, "Tonight, let's have peace." How crazy is that? And there are accounts from all along the battle lines that night of soldiers putting up lights in the trenches, singing songs, crossing battle lines, exchanging gifts. And that peace lasted the next day into Christmas Day, where the soldiers climbed out of their trenches, left their guns behind them, and met each other as brothers, as fellow human beings, as fellow bearers of the image of God. And some soldiers even held communion together. Some even played games of soccer on the battlefield on Christmas Day. And so there are multiple monuments in France dedicated to the truce, and even to the one of them was particularly to the soccer game that was played. And so after one of those monuments was inaugurated in Flanders, France in 2014, Ken Skates, the Welsh Minister for Culture, he said, "A century ago, when war was so frequent, something magical happened. Through the Christmas spirit, the sound of war was silenced, and soldiers from opposing sides laid down their weapons and exchanged photographs and gifts." Like, have you ever heard of that happening? It was more than magic, though. That was the power of Christmas. It was the power of what Christmas represents, the coming of Jesus. And in the midst of overwhelming hatred and darkness, Jesus is always inviting us to overwhelming love and light. So you know who needed Christmas? The world did. And Jesus said this about his role in the world in John chapter 8. He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. World War I was a great example of what happens when people organize themselves around power and around their own egos. And what do we get when people do that? We get violence, and we get hatred, and we get darkness. And a really important takeaway for us is that it reveals this truth, that we become what we worship, for better or worse. That we become what we worship. Why is it important what you organize yourself around? Why is it important what you ascribe supreme importance to? Because we become what we worship, for better or for worse. This is true for everybody, everywhere. Like, we worship what we order ourselves around. We worship what we assign great importance in our lives. And here's the thing, we are as small as what we worship. You will reflect the limitations of what you worship. This is why God says, do not create idols. Why would you put me in this tiny little thing and worship this tiny little thing? You will reflect the limitations of what you worship. War, that's what we get when men worship themselves. And as a result, we get fear, we get hatred, and we get violence. And by the way, Christians are just as susceptible to this as anybody else. When you begin to worship yourself, when you begin to worship men, this is what you get. When we serve our egos, when we worship our egos, we get smaller and we get pettier and we don't become what we could become. And we could become as beautiful and as loving and as compassionate and as alive as what we worship. So what or whom we worship matters. What we organize ourselves around matters. And so God gave us Christmas to say, organize yourselves around Jesus. Trust Jesus. And John 3:16 says that God so what? Loved. God so loved the world that he gave us Jesus. He didn't give us a small idea. He didn't give us a small thing. He didn't give us just a small person. He gave us Jesus. This was Jesus who came not in power, not with wealth, but was born basically in a cave, in a stable. Jesus who came not with status, but as a refugee on the run, someone who was raised as a carpenter. This is Jesus who turned water into wine. This is Jesus who healed and pursued and spent time with and had compassion on the sick and the poor and the least of these, the people that nobody else would touch or go near. This is Jesus who allowed himself to be arrested, who allowed himself to be beaten, who allowed himself to be tortured, and who allowed himself to be murdered on a Roman cross. And this is Jesus who defeated death. This is Jesus who said, before Abraham ever was, I am. I was already there. This is Jesus who Scripture describes as the one who was and is to come, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Jesus who is the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Jesus who came to reconcile all things to himself, including you, including me, including everybody else in the entire world. Jesus who himself is our peace. This is Jesus, our hope. Jesus, the one who sets us free. Jesus, the light of the world. And when you organize yourself around someone like that, you're organizing yourself truly around the source of life, the source of wisdom, the source of hope, the the source of love. And when you do that, you will be made whole. Even in times of war and darkness and hatred and violence, when we organize ourselves around Jesus, there is the possibility for peace and hope and love. Because what I have noticed in my own life is the same thing I've noticed throughout history, is the same thing I've noticed in Scripture, that even though you think the darkness is going to win, even though it looks like the darkness is going to win, even though it looks like violence is going to win, even though it looks like hatred is going to win, even though it looks like despair is going to win, it never does. It never does. With Jesus, there's light, and there's hope, and there's love, and that will always win. Here's the thing. When we order ourselves around something smaller, something lesser, we're going to discover that we fall short. And I think we all know this. I think we've all tried this. I think we're all still doing this in some kind of way. But when we order ourselves around, when we give supreme importance to, when we give our energy and devotion to a person or a relationship, the problem is that person doesn't have the capacity to make you whole. When we order ourselves around things or ideas that don't have our best interest in mind, guys, Amazon, I hate to break this to you, Amazon doesn't love you, okay? I don't know if you knew that. Amazon doesn't love you. Some of us, we love Amazon. We love 2-day shipping. We love that we get all the stuff that we want. Amazon doesn't love you. Amazon loves making money, all right? Corporations don't love you. And that's all to say, there are some really great people that are leading these corporations, but here's the truth. They love their families. They're trying to feed their families, all right, but they don't love you. That corporation doesn't love you. The culture at large does not love you. You will learn this if you pay attention to this. The culture is not interested in what is best for you. Nobody's looking out for you. So if you give yourself to a person who doesn't have the capacity to make you whole, or you give yourself to a thing that does not care about you, do not be surprised when that person or that thing cannot save you in your darkest hour. But God so loved the world. God so loved you. God so loved me that he gave us Jesus. And Jesus is saying, I can do that. I can save you. I can make you whole. When you trust me, you are trusting the author of life. You are trusting the source of all good things. And I can make you whole. The Apostle Paul writes that when we organize ourselves around Jesus, we organize ourselves around faith and hope and love. And you know who needs that? The whole world does. The whole world needs that. So maybe you're someone who would never consider yourself to be religious, but you might be a little religious if you have ordered yourself around something, an idea, a thing, a person. So the question is, whatever you've given importance to in your life, is it making you whole? Is it making you whole? Or are we just coping? And have you crossed Jesus off of your list of options for things that might be able to make you whole just because of the religion stigma, or maybe because of what you've seen from other Christians? So during this series, here's what I would love. I would love for you to be open to rethinking and reconsidering Jesus. To ask yourself, if Jesus can do what he says he can do, to bring light and love and hope and wholeness to your life. Now, if you're here and you're already consider yourself to be religious or Christian, I think the question for you is this. As time has gone on, have you organized yourself around anything that is not Jesus? This is why the writer of Hebrews says that we should fix our eyes on Jesus, who's the perfecter of our faith, because it's really easy for our eyes to get fixed on other stuff. It happens to me all the time, and I realize, man, I have swapped Jesus out for something so much smaller. And I think all of the complaints that we have collectively about religion and Christianity and all that stuff, all of the complaints we have are what happens when we swap Jesus out for something smaller. When we settle for something smaller, when we have allowed something smaller to distract us from Jesus. So if that's you, as we go through the Christmas season, would you retrain your eyes? Would you retrain your focus? Would you be willing to ask God to show you if there's anything that has crept into your priorities, into what you have made important? Is there any way in which you have been settling for something smaller than Jesus in your life? Because remember, we become what we worship. We become what we worship. When we worship something small, we have set our limitations. But when we worship Jesus, the source of life and love and light, good things happen. That's when good things happen. Now, in part 2 of this series, we're gonna get into why God came to us as a person. Like why this way? You know, why not announce it with fireworks? Why not a huge parade? Why this way? It turns out that the way this happened is really important and really intriguing, but that's next week. For now, can we all agree that we could all use a little more hope and more light and more love and more wholeness in our lives? I know I want more of that in my life. I want that for you in your life. I want that for our city. And so because of that, I believe the world